John Norris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be on this morning, Patrick. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I know you're a real busy guy. You've got a lot of irons in the fire, and I appreciate you coming on. I really do. We're going to start out here. I was looking at some, like your Facebook page and your website and all that, and there's a picture of you getting an award from Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm assuming he was the
Right.
governor at the time.
He was
Uh,
our governor in California. Yeah, yeah.
did you get a chance to hang out with him? Did you like, hey Arnie, what's up?
We didn't have a lot of time because
Oh,
that was the governor's Medal of Valor ceremony, and there were probably 20 officers
oh, okay.
statewide that were getting that award, and we were, it was right around Christmas. It was a really nice ceremony the way they did it in downtown Sacramento, our capital city, in my old home state, the Golden State of California. But we had a little bit of sidebar talks, while I was about to go up on stage with him.
Yeah.
And I just remember I looked over at him and I said, Governor, um, being a conservation officer and kind of a special ops guy, and the environment and everything, and being a sci-fi fan, I said, you absolutely crushed it in Predator. And he just he just smiled. He goes, you like that one? I go, I like all your work, man, but that one holds up to today, and any Predator since, derivative or spinoff, hasn't quite mastered it. And he just grinned, patted me on the back, and then we had the ceremony. So yeah, it was kind of a special day. Special day.
That is awesome. Anytime you can meet Arnold, I think would be a good day. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But where did you grow up?
I grew up, Patrick, in the suburbs of the Silicon Valley, the tech capital of the world, there in Santa Clara County, California, in a small town, San Martin, Morgan Hill. They're two kind of small towns, equestrian, agriculture kind of based, about 25 to 35, 25 to 30 miles south of the heart of Silicon Valley. Um, yeah, and what people don't realize is you think of Silicon Valley and you think big city,
Oh yeah.
you think, just nothing but urbanization. And certainly San
Hmm.
Jose is a hop-in city because of the technology and what we have in the Silicon Valley. But all of those surrounding foothills, from all the way over to the West Coast and the Pacific Ocean, and then all the backcountry to the east, full of wildlife. We have trophy tule elk, antelope, actually, black-tailed deer,
Really?
hogs, turkey, fisheries, steelhead trout. I mean, we have everything, from the standpoint of wildlife resources, and a lot of hunting that still goes on, and a lot of good conservation model activity going on, through the generations. So California was a rich state for all of that, and it still is. And it's amazing for me to still do a lot of work and education in my old home state, because it is, as you know from researching me a little bit, it's kind of the hot button state, and really kind of the template for the world to look at things like drought,
Oh yeah.
water stealing, trespass grow, cannabis from the cartels. It's kind of like a little, it's the litmus test right now of the world of some of these environmental impacts we're trying to educate on, and that we're really fighting nationally and internationally now, not just in the Golden State.
Okay. So how did you get into law enforcement, more specifically into like becoming a game warden?
It was a complete, I call it divine intervention. It was not the original plan. I always had a fondness for going into either the military or doing some sort of service. But when I had the opportunity to go to college and, get into a lucrative career that was kind of creative, because I was a drafter and a designer in high school taking those
Hmm.
classes, I was going the route of civil engineering major in an impacted program in San Jose State University, right there in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I was also looking at the ROTC program in the engineering program
Hmm.
to do a special forces run in the military.
Yeah.
And then while I was in the engineering program, on my first winter break after the first semester, I was in Henrico State Park, which is the backcountry 105,000 acre park. I grew up learning to backpack and all my survival skills with a good friend and a pack horse. And we were in the middle of winter on winter break, way back in a remote lake we'd never been to. And we actually had a game warden come out of nowhere and contact us,
Okay.
thinking we were a poaching crew for deer, when
Oh
we were
wow.
just a couple of dumb college kids soaking wet with bad equipment from a big storm the night before. And I thought he was a park ranger. He told me he was a game warden. I said, what is that? And it blew my mind. And keep in mind, I had been hunting and an active conservationist since I was 9 years old, yet had never been contacted by a game warden in my life, which was so unreal and non-traditional for us game wardens that meet game wardens very young and we're kind of mentored. So I had to go to the criminal justice advisor right on winter break when I got out of the woods and find out how I got that job. And I was off to the races and changed my major into criminal justice and never looked back.
What do your folks think?
They were just real happy. They were like,
Okay.
you know, we were really proud of you on the engineering side. You were getting the grades and, you know, you're doing advanced math, calculus, physics, all this crazy stuff in my general ed. And I was the first in the, you know, of my siblings to go to college, being the oldest. So they were really proud of that. But they also saw that I was just grinding. They also saw that I was getting the schoolwork done, and then I was coming back from college and going out into the woods, you know, and running around in the mountains and hunting and fishing and hiking and shooting. And then when they found out I met a game warden, they're like, and they saw my eyes light up, they go, "That's your passion. That's your calling. Now we see it, you know, don't hold back." And then, you know, you don't become a game warden to, you know, make a lot of money and support all your family. You just don't.
Right.
You get into it for the passion of the job and the commitment to protecting and fighting on our thin green line for conservation. But it was, I'm so blessed that I ran into that game warden and didn't make the wrong choice, because there's a lot of choices out there, and I had a
Sure.
lot of opportunities, and I worked hard to set up those opportunities. And fortunately, by the good graces and the good man above, ran into that game warden at that, you know, the pivotal time before I was too far down the rabbit hole of an engineering career.
Is there anybody in your family that's in law enforcement or anything like that?
Yeah, my sister is a retired San Jose fire captain. She had a great career in San Jose.
Mm.
Many uncles. I come from a lineage of military veterans. My grandfather was a World War II vet, actually at Pearl Harbor on
Oh,
one of
wow.
our ships when on that fateful day. Did a career in the Navy. My father was Army. Two or three uncles were Army. Two or three uncles were state troopers, both in the southeast and
Hmm.
up here on the Pacific coastline as well in Western U.S. So come from a lineage of public service. Other firefighters, cousins that are state troopers and have some military careers. So yeah, we've all kind of had that in our family through grandpa and his 9 kids. It
Yeah.
kind of spread out for all of us.
Yeah, I guess sometimes that seed is planted and you don't even realize it, and then it just takes a little bit of nudging, and then boom, you're there. So, what exactly is a game warden?
Man, I like when people ask that question. I appreciate you asking that because it's mistaken. You know, not everyone
Yes.
knows exactly what we do, and they kind of mix up what a park ranger does, what a
Hmm.
border patrol agent does, what a game warden does. And the thing is, a game warden is a law enforcement officer sworn and trained and certified to enforce every public safety law generally in the books. For instance, in California, we go through a full police academy like you did.
Hmm.
In California, it's called a post academy peace officer standard and training standards, which every state has some derivative of. And we do the 6.5 month standard police academy, get certified to enforce anything in our penal code, health and safety code, business and professions code. And then we go into 7 or 8 more weeks of fish and wildlife specific training, um, animal ID, you know, forensically doing necropsies and field dressing, exotic weapons training, ballistics, all those different things. And then while we're sworn to do everything, and we're also federally deputized under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do interstate and national cases, even out of state as federal agents, our forte and our focus is hunting, fishing, environmental crime, outreach, and education related to wildlife protection. So we're going to enforce hunting laws, angling laws, commercial fishing laws, black market, commercial sales of wildlife and wildlife parts. We're going to do all that, catch poachers, guys that spotlight at night illegally for animals, you know, take too many fish, gill net, alter streams, destroy streams in the process of other projects, water pollution, things like that. That's our focus. And because there are so few game wardens, not only in California, but in the entire nation, we proudly call ourselves, you know, some of the guys on the and gals on the thin green line. And as we have the thin blue line, which is all of us in LE, and I see your thin blue line flag
Oh,
up
yeah.
there. Loving
Absolutely.
it.
Proud of it. Yep.
And thank you so much for your service, brother. But on the thin green line, there's just not that much of us. And if it isn't for really environmentally conscious people, especially our hunters and anglers that are legal and ethical out there looking for violations, we wouldn't even put a dent in poaching. If it wasn't for working with our brothers in blue and our sisters in blue, we have so many mainline law enforcement, police officers, sheriff's deputies, rural tribal police, et cetera. We call them force multipliers, and we're all under that umbrella. So
Hmm.
I really feel like we're all part of the same line, and it's that red, blue, green maize mix,
Right.
because we're all doing it. And the game warden job now has spilled into urban environments so much because of urban pollution, because our job is first and foremost public safety, and the civil unrest that's just happened through the COVID era,
Right.
through the change of administration, through the border control issues. Game wardens are finding themselves doing what you do, and you're finding, yourself on the police officer front doing game warden stuff too. It's just one of those things that we become so thin across the nation with the demands put on all of us, that we're all working together. And that's what my message is here in retirement: is the thin green line. We're all part of it. Civilians, police officers, game wardens, federal agents, military, active duty and veterans, you name it. We're all part of that thin green line because we all want to protect our environment, and we know we're protecting the public safety in that process.
So your jurisdiction was pretty much nationwide since you were federal, correct?
Yes, it was. I mean, we're not going to go into another state, let's say next door to Nevada, or I'm going to go to Oregon and start working in that state unless I'm
Hmm.
working with their officers. But I can go across interstate lines with that federal identification card and certification to help other state officers as they can come into California and do the same.
Sure.
And we can act as investigators for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who are on the national front and incredibly thin on numbers, and generate cases, and work with them, and actually work for them in our particular states for federal violations that involve a lot of felonies. When certain wildlife crimes come across state lines, they become what's called a Lacey Act violation. And now we've got felony statutes, which, as you know from your law enforcement history, felonies hit hard. And we need good felony, basically penalties
Right.
for some of these wildlife criminals to really put a dent and stop them.
Absolutely. So again, researching you, etc., as far as training goes, I saw a thing. You went to Cambodia for
I
training?
did. Yeah. I was really lucky to Chief
Yeah.
Nancy Foley, who was heading up our agency at the time. And you've heard me speak of her and Chief Mike Carry on fondly a lot on other podcasts. Um, we had the opportunity to assist a group called Wild Aid and go over and train Cambodian officers, French gendarmerie, a mix of Southeast Asian wildlife agents that were based out of Cambodia for a conference. And
Okay.
so myself and retired Special Operations Covert Unit Lieutenant Kathy Pontine, she's codenamed Alpha in my first book, War in the Woods, we were asked by the chief to go over and basically put on a covert and overt investigators course for their officers. And our agency had never done that. We never gone overseas and been invited to do something like that. So it was a huge progressive honoring step for the agency,
Yeah.
and certainly just a treat for us to be able to go over there and have that opportunity. It was definitely one of those top five highlight, thankful moments I have in my career. But it was fun, it was exciting, and it was challenging because we had to work through interpreters and set up
Oh,
PowerPoints and field exercises. So the logistics of getting a group of 30 to 40 officers out and doing field exercises in crazy Cambodia, and then doing urban fish market checks and underground markets and outdoor
oh, okay.
scenarios, and then doing the classes. It was a challenge, but we had a really effective 2 weeks over there. And now we're doing a lot of stuff internationally, other ways. South Africa is an example,
Hmm.
with some of the ivory trade poaching going on over there, sending
Oh,
our
okay.
officers there
Yeah.
because of the ivory trade, and the need to have wildlife trafficking teams in every state. And we have a really, really dedicated and really progressive, effective one in California. So we're starting to go overseas more, thankfully, because we're seeing that thin green line affects nations independently,
Yeah.
because we're trading on the black market, nation to nation to nation. So our species are being impacted by the overseas countries that want our wildlife, and they want to buy it illegally on the black market. And certainly the ivory trade is very lucrative here in America, where sadly so many of our ivory, clad big plains game animals, if you will, on the African continent are under siege all the time from poachers for that ivory.
Wow. So if I'm writing a book and one of my characters is a game warden, what's the rank structure?
It another really good question, because it really varies. So we're called a lot of different titles.
Yeah.
Game warden is kind of what I consider the heart, meat and potatoes of the wild land officer out by himself. When I was sworn on in 1992, I'm going to date myself a little bit.
I'm
Our
not too
official
far
title,
behind you.
right? Yeah, you just retired, what, buddy? A year or two after I did, so
Yeah.
we're close there. But a game warden is what we were called officially when I started my career. Other states, as I got further along the career, you hear the term conservation officer, which is an all-encompassing umbrella term to
Mm-hmm.
talk about what a wildlife officer does. In California now, we still have the rank of game warden, but we have the title of wildlife officer as well. So, and you'll hear, you know, resources officer. There's a bunch of different names for a game
Yeah.
warden, but essentially, what sets the game warden apart from all those other professions in law enforcement we talked about a bit earlier is our focus. We're not and our jurisdiction. Game wardens are not limited to one park, let's say, as a park ranger. They're
Mm.
not limited to one city. They're not limited to one county. They're usually statewide and assigned to a particular district within a state, but they can travel anywhere.
Sure.
And they can help their partners, and they can help brothers in blue, sisters in blue, as an example, anywhere in the state they're in, and can go over state boundaries
Mm.
under the Lacey Act. So
Sure.
that's essentially what we go by game warden. I still call myself a game warden. I use that title. I think it's the most traditional and the most accurate for me, at least.
Now, when you retired, you were at the rank of lieutenant. What are
Yes.
like this? How many steps does it take to get to that, and like what's above
So
that?
states, it's similar to the military, straight line system. A lieutenant is still a working field officer that is supervising, his first level of supervision and leadership for a squad of game wardens that may entail one, two, or three counties. So
Mm.
in other states, it would be like a sergeant. In traditional law enforcement agencies, like maybe your previous agency, the sergeant is that patrol sergeant that's overseeing a squad of guys or gals, but he's out with them.
Yeah,
He's
that's what I
working.
did. Yeah.
That's what, yeah. So you and I
Yeah.
were basically equivalent in rank. We are still in the
Okay.
field, still kind of leading from the front with our guys and
Yep.
our gals, but we were one rank of supervision and leading that team. So that's what a lieutenant in California does. And then from there, you go to captain, and captain will oversee 3 or 4 lieutenant squads. And then it's assistant chief, and an assistant chief usually runs an entire district in part of a state. Like, for instance, we have 4 to 5, maybe 6 districts if we count the Marine side in California, and there will be an assistant chief in every district in California working for badge number 1, which is our chief of patrol and the head of our law enforcement division. I know my co-host Wayne Saunders on the podcast that I co-host, Warden's Watch, and the
Mm-hmm.
Thin Green Line podcast. Wayne's from the small state of New Hampshire, and they have a colonel, and their colonel is their upper ranking officer,
Okay.
which would be equivalent to our chief of patrol. And they have different. Corporal is in that structure that might be what you would do as a sergeant, what I would do as a lieutenant, but it's there's usually the same number of ranks. It's just we're titled a little different.
Okay, gotcha. One thing that jumps out at me, obviously you went through all the law enforcement training, then you had to do the extra training for the wildlands stuff, identifying, all the different critters that are running around out there
Right.
and knowing all the different laws, regarding conservation and et cetera. One thing that jumps out at me, and I'm not sure if this is something that was stressed, would be being in shape, being
Yeah.
PT, and is this an ongoing thing? Because, there's only so many places that a four wheeler can go or a horse or whatever. You're going to have to do some humping.
Right.
And, you're carrying a pack, you've got gear, etc. It's not like me where I jumped in a Ford Explorer and drove around a lot. Every now and then, yes, it got physical, but I was never walking for miles and miles and miles, but could you kind of dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, brother. It's something. To be an effective game warden, you just have to be in outdoor physical shape. And when I say be an effective game warden, that's where we're not what's called a windshield warden, where you're just driving your truck around. Maybe you're getting out of the truck and walking 40, 50 yards down to a shoreline, checking a fisherman for their license and their
Right.
catch, and jumping back in the car. To catch really dedicated poachers doing hardcore wildlife loss crimes, you got to get in the forest. You got to hike 1, 2, sometimes 10 miles. And we did all that on the Met special operations team that we're going to talk about a little later, I'm sure.
Yes.
But my whole career was based on getting out of the truck and hiking. That was one of the joys of the job. So you got to stay in shape. You're usually, in the summer months during hunting season, it's really hot, and you are backtracking hunters to check for compliance, which are allies on the thin green line. And you're doing a lot of humping to go face to face with poachers that are doing it completely wrong deliberately by yourself, or maybe with one other partner if you're lucky, or many times my companion lab would be with me.
Mm.
But yeah, definitely need to stay in shape. And one of the things I did and continue to do in post retirement, and I'm certainly not as fast and agile as I used to be, but um, I stayed really into running, especially built up to marathons. Did a couple of full length Ironman triathlons,
Oh wow. Okay.
right prior to my 40s, some back to back ones. That was kind of a life goal to get to that level, but
Yeah.
it was also to keep me in the best shape possible for being the best game warden I could be. And that was all happening around the development of our special operations unit, what would lead to the Met team. And that's really where the physical fitness has to be at a peak, because when you're hiking, 2 to 10 miles a day, and you're doing it with 40 to 60 pounds of gear on
Right.
you,
Yeah.
and you're not on a trail, and you're going after cartels deep in the woods at headwaters on uneven terrain, and then stay focused and mentally acute, not fatigued and wrecked, you got to be in tip top shape. And, guys on our Met team are in that state, and they're forced to stay in that shape, which is good just for, longevity of the career. But that's was always something throughout the career, that my partners and myself really focused on. The police fire games in California that would move around and move to other states. The police Olympics was something we'd be actively involved in. We had a shooting team for, competition pistol, long range rifle.
Mm.
We would do the biathlon event, the running and shooting.
Oh sure.
We do, I'm a motocross Baja racer and have a history there. So we do the motocross races, all things just to have the camaraderie of all of us together on the thin blue and green line and whatnot, and the fire games and stuff, but really to stay in shape and just make it fun. Because, PT and keeping a training regimen, as with the demands of the job and the family and the long hours and the crazy things we work on
Right.
the first responder side, it's not all fun and games. Training is tough, and it's really more mental that you commit to doing it than following through that makes it tough, but just scheduling that time. And we always tried to make it fun with things like the police fire games, or training for my first and then my second Ironman triathlon.
Yeah.
That was like a mission,
So so
but it
were
was,
you guys required to do like like semi-annual or annual PT tests? Like you have to
yeah,
qualify, or at least we had to qualify with our with our pistols and our rifles, every year.
right.
But there was no PT whatsoever. Once you got out of the academy,
Yeah.
you're on your own. You're free range. Which I thought was a mistake. But
Yeah.
so be it.
Yeah, we did not have much of a requirement out of the academy. As you remember, we I'm sure you and I both shared that in the academy you had a test, and you had a standard, and you had to
Oh,
keep a
right.
certain standard, and then you had it at the beginning of the academy, and then at the end
Yep.
to see how much you improved. Well, I thought that standard was great and should have stayed. We should have done annual testing, and we used to actually have physical maintenance testing once a year, where we would keep a pay incentive if we passed the physical maintenance test to keep our
Mm.
credential. And it was a step test, it was a run, it was a weight training deal, cardio and strength. And
Yeah.
that was the greatest thing we had annually. And that about 15 years ago went away. And when it went away, I thought it was the biggest tragedy for the agency. I think, for overall physical standards, mental and physical acuity to do the job safely and accurately, but more or less, to motivate us, to keep us
Sure.
on our toes.
Absolutely.
Um, and it was another thing like advanced officer training, where you do an in-service, you'd go to your annual physical maintenance test, and half the district would be there, and you'd see everybody else. And,
Sure.
you could razz each other if you weren't in shape, and you could compliment each other if you were. So, but we did away with that. So no, there's, after you get out of the academy, it's really up to you, and being that self-motivator.
Now, you mentioned earlier how you have to work with like state, federal, law enforcement, tribal police. What does that look like? I mean, they come to you and say, "Hey, we've got this problem or whatever," or you go to them and says, "We need to augment our manpower for X, Y, or Z." Is there a lot of cooperation between all this?
There really is, as long as the warden, in that particular district, is really out there beating the bush to make themselves known, and show everybody that they're there to help. One of the things I learned from some of my mentors in the academy, and I had three amazing field training officers, They were legendary. They were the
Yeah.
superheroes of the agency, and I was lucky to get 3 good ones. And I heard this from all 3 of them independently without talking to one another. They said, "Look, Norris, you're a go-getter. You were a squad leader in the academy. I can see your motivation, but listen, you are going to make your career as either a really good game warden or one of these guys that just cruises by and does average work in the first 2 years of your career. And the rest of the state's going to know within agency, and other allied agencies are going to know what you're about in your first 2 years of production." And that really stuck with me, Patrick, because we all want to do a good job. We all want to prove ourselves, especially fresh out of the gate. But I took that 2 year mark as kind of a timeline, and I really like timelines because it kind of gives you a tangible goal. And what I did when I got to Riverside County in Southern California and started my career in '92 is I just started driving around with hundreds of business cards and meeting everybody,
Oh, okay.
going to the sheriff substations, going to the local PD, going to the U.S. Forest Service, meeting the LEO who became a lifelong friend, federal agents, military. I had the Camp Pendleton Marine Corps base literally bordering my forest. So
Mm.
I went and met, Marine Corps guys doing training, and just put myself out there. So one, I was visible, and two, I was eager to help. And until you really do that, and these other agencies see that a game warden is really dedicated, really good in the woods, really stealthy, can help with other investigations, they don't really know and trust what you can do from other law enforcement agencies because it's really ambiguous what we do. Hence your question at the start of the
Right.
podcast.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we do. And in order to be really effective, especially now, we find that I'll take my old home front of Santa Clara County, the Silicon Valley, as an example. That even though I, went into special operations and ran a statewide, tactical unit, I still was based out of the Santa Clara County Valley, or the Silicon Valley rather. And getting in with all of those tactical units and all of those other law enforcement units, and knowing that I could help them and they could help me, and my wardens that work for me could do the same, really legitimized us on the tactical front.
Mm.
And we became go-to folks when there was a mountain lion treed, by Stanford University in Palo Alto, and they happen to know a game warden that handles that and can deal with that. When you
Okay.
have a predatory cat treed and injured, and everybody's around it, and something's going to have to get done, and law enforcement agencies just go, "What now?" you know,
Yeah. I know I wouldn't
what
know
now?
what to do.
Yeah, we need a game warden, and we need to. And we did a
Sure.
lot of interesting things where I jumped right in with an agency SWAT team and kind of take over on incident command of where to direct their operators, and
Okay.
if it was a public safety cat, how we were going to dispatch it, or how we were going to trank and remove it, how we were going to clear perimeters for safety and put up check areas, and bring in deal with the press, all kinds of things like that that the urban agencies just aren't used to dealing with. And then we become really valuable. And then certainly when there's a felony that goes down in progress somewhere, an active shooter situation, we jump right in with you guys with the same training and the same skill set, and become that force multiplier in some of the more heinous things we're seeing throughout the nation, unfortunately, today.
Sure. So, what was the resolution for the cat up in the tree?
That one got tranquilized,
Oh, okay.
and that one got removed. But I had one that was under an RV sales trailer
Oh,
in
jeez.
an RV sales yard in South San Jose one morning.
Oh boy.
And it was a big female. She had been hit by a car. Her back
Ah.
hips were busted. She was in total pain. And she was actually under the RV. And when people, when the secretaries were walking up the steps to go into the sales office in the morning, they heard the hissing and the howling right underneath them, and looked under and saw these big eyes in this giant cat and freaked out. And I happened to, it's my hometown right down the
Yeah.
road. So I happened to deploy and get there as the SWAT team from San Jose and Morgan Hill were arriving. And now we have this cat under a trailer we got to deal with. And we ended up having to dispatch that cat, but we had to do it under basically under a porch in a dark
Oh,
environment. And we had
yeah.
things like backstop issues for weapons, and
Right.
they
Right.
had weapons that were too much. And I ended up having to do it with my handgun, working with their SWAT unit, and then handling the cat appropriately. But that was a real bonding experience, to say the least,
Oh, yeah.
for me and San Jose merged team and the Morgan Hill and Gilroy SWAT teams that responded to this cat, with all these people freaking out at 8 o'clock in the morning when
Oh, yeah.
everyone's commuting right past them for San Jose business. So it goes different ways, but it always worked out favorably, where if there was an injured animal, we stopped the injury. We stopped the the inhumane suffering, if you will.
Sure.
If we had to remove the cat, not dispatch the cat, we always did what we could within the balance of our protocol and our laws, with public safety being first and foremost concern.
Right. You know, another thing that jumps out at me is, my wife and I, when everything was locked down, we watched Longmire. And, you have the small town sheriff dealing with the the tribal police nearby and how those two interacted. Have you had much dealings with like tribal police, sovereign nation, them saying is like you can't go any further than this, like gate or anything like that?
I never had that. Some of my partners had
Okay.
that in Northern California when they work in the Northern California districts, but the dealings I had with the tribal police were all when I co-developed and led the marijuana enforcement team, our tactical
Okay.
unit. And what was happening then is it was completely the opposite. It wasn't adversarial. It was completely amicable. And they actually reached out to us
Oh, okay.
to say, hey, we've got these cartel growers decimating our wildlands and wildlife, sucking our water dry out of our big steelhead rivers up here in Northern California. And, during drought, I mean, a lot of big problems. And they said, we don't have the bandwidth with our tribal police to handle this problem alone. And, we'd like to invite you guys in to help us. And that was such a bonding experience and a rekindling of positive relationships,
Yeah.
where tribal lands had had kind of an abrasive relationship with some mainline, domestic law enforcement teams, federal, state, or local.
Hmm.
And we worked really effectively with the tribal police, on the tactical front, and took out a lot of grows, arrested a lot of bad guys, reclamated a lot of, destroyed wildlands from this toxically tainted cannabis grow operation, and actually, help them with the reclamation process of restoring the environment. And specifically the Hoopa tribe in Northern California and the Yurok tribe over in Central Eastern California, we had really good relationships developed with them through the Met tenure, and I'm very proud of that. And that's some of the things that we're going to highlight a little bit more
Hmm.
in the second edition of my latest book, Hidden War, in development. So
Yeah, the first time I heard about you was your interview on Jack Carr's podcast,
yeah.
Danger Close. And, you're talking about your book, Hidden War, how special operations game wardens are reclaiming America's wildland from drug cartels. And I'm like, I'm a pretty well versed guy. I think I know what's going on in the world. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I had no idea this was going on. Holy shit. You know, could you kind of explain to us what a trespass grow is and kind of give us an overview of that?
Yeah, I sure can. And I'm glad you tuned in to Danger Close. Great podcast. Jack's a
Oh,
good
yeah.
friend, and really, really honored he had me on. And he took notice of both books, War in the Woods and Hidden War, when I was on some of his mutual friends' podcasts, and got really concerned for the issue and took an issue on it of not only being a vetted SEAL team veteran, but also a diehard conservationist lifelong. So he's on that thin green line right along with me and all of us, in this circle, and is exposing that issue. And we need to get that issue exposed. But a trespass grow is an illegal cannabis grow that'll never be, regulated or sanctioned. California is a regulated cannabis state now for recreational and medicinal cannabis. There's a percentage of growers doing it absolutely correctly, preserving and conserving their water, not putting toxic pesticides on the plants, on the product, or in the waterways, and complying with the laws to sell cannabis legitimately through a regulated state. But then there's the dark side, especially the cartel groups up out of Mexico that come onto public and private, outdoor spots, and find a spot where they can divert water from a pristine waterway, grow sometimes tens of thousands of cannabis plants destined strictly for the black market profit, and use EPA banned poisons like carbofuran and metaphos that aren't even legal to use in this country because they're so toxic, very deadly, banned by the EPA 20 years ago because of the nerve agents and the anticoagulants that were used in, originally developed by the Nazis actually for their biological chemical weapons way back in the 30s and 40s. This stuff is nasty, and they import it from Mexico, and they actually put it on the flower, on the plants that's being consumed on the black market unknowingly. That poison makes it into the soil, it gets into the waterways, the water diversions. So they do egregious, massive amounts of environmental damage and toxic poisoning of not only water and cannabis, not only destroying wildlife, but in putting a huge public safety threat to cannabis consumers nationwide that don't know what they're ingesting from black market sources. And the cartels are embedded all over California doing tainted cannabis. 25, 27 other states throughout the nation doing the cannabis grow operations. But all of these cartels are the same, come from the same organizations that are trafficking humans. They're doing the child sex trafficking trade in all 50 states, methamphetamine cooks in all 50 states, fentanyl, synthetic fentanyl from dirty labs,
Mhm.
these counterfeit opioids that are every other one is poisoned and might kill you the second you ingest it. They're doing a lot of nasty stuff that affects everybody in the country, not just those states where they're in the woods doing the cannabis problem.
So how, like, give us an idea. How big are some of these grow operations, like area wise?
The biggest one that I ever did personally was, or that I was ever involved in with our team, was just shy of probably 50,000 plants, and
So
it
yeah,
covered it covered a mile of ridgeline. It was
wow.
massive. It
So
was spread out. It just it's mind blowing. And now,
yeah.
granted, Patrick, that's a huge example of the largest of the large, but an average one is 2 to 3,000 to 4,000, 5,000 plants, and that imprint spread out to keep it camouflaged from the air is still going to be several acres of land destroyed. And you're going to span, a good section, a good quarter mile, let's say, of a ridge line above a creek or with the creek above it. So um, all of the imprints, even for the smaller grows, are significant.
So what kind of numbers are we talking as far as what these crops are worth
You know that
for the
the
cartel?
price it comes down to, if it depends how much each plant yields, but if each plant yields 4 or 5 pounds of cannabis, and that's a really big prosperous plant, they're going to get a couple $1,000s out of each plant. Now with the market saturated but the black market still thriving, they're going to get less than that. But the bottom line is a 5,000 plant outdoor cannabis grow is going to yield several $1,000,000 of black market profit for the cartels. And the other thing that 2 or 3,000 marijuana plants are going to do is they're going to suck a lot of pristine water as far as water amounts. There's a lot of different figures being thrown around out there as to how much water these illegal cannabis plants need and how much water they steal. But coming directly from our scientists that have studied it extensively, and outside of any political answers, we find that in talking to reformed growers that have come out of the dark and said, I don't do that anymore, I'm an environmentalist, and
Yeah.
I can tell you right now the average amount of water that my plants stole or needed every day was about 5 gallons. And there's plus or minus depending on heat levels and
Sure.
plant strain. But if you take 5 gallons as an average, and that plant is going to be in the ground, if it's not interdicted by one of our teams, at least 90 days, but maybe 275 days. And you take 5,000 plants at 5 gallons a day for 275 days, and you add up all those zeros, you're talking about hundreds of millions of gallons eventually of water stolen in a massive grow site, millions and millions. And to the point where in my old golden state of California, during the Met era that I ran the team and was operational from 2013 to 2018, we're looking at 2 or 3 billion gallons of water conservatively of
Wow.
just the grows that we impacted. And certainly there's a lot more water being stolen, excuse me, nationwide, because we're only, hitting a very small portion of the problem.
Yeah, some of the things that jump out at me is the personnel and the equipment that would be needed for a grow operation like this. It's gonna raise some eyebrows. I mean, how do they get in? And then once they harvest their crop, how do they get it out without like law enforcement not noticing this or people saying, "Hey, what the heck is that all about?" You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, how do they get the equipment and personnel in, and how do they get their crop out?
Yeah, it's all very clever and they do a lot of arduous work, and they're very efficient in how they do it. They hike everything out on their back usually. They'll do multiple loads. They'll hike very far. They're very tough. They're very seasoned, and they'll all do it in camouflage clothing. They'll move in darkness, to get into the grow site. They'll set it up. They'll continue to resupply it for months and months and months.
Wow.
And then when it's time to process the marijuana, they'll do it in the grow site. They'll weigh and measure it into 1 pound bags, vacuum seal it in plastic bags, and they'll hike it out directly on their backs to go to distribution centers to be sold all over the country. All the infrastructure, the water pipe, the camping gear, the equipment, everything they need to actually run the grow site for three,
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, they leave it out there. They are not going to take it out because they're going to leave it out there to have an environmental damaging impact because they want to come back to it the next season if they're
Oh,
not
okay.
interdicted. And then when we go in there and see it out there, we have all of these problems that we have to take care of besides the arrest and apprehension phase of the mission, and then eradicating safely these poison, toxically tainted cannabis plants without being contaminated ourselves, making sure they don't go to the black market and get to our American public. But now we have to reclaim the damages, restore the waterways, and take out all the poisons and trash and waste, or we're going to have an environmental destruction continuation that won't stop until that stuff's taken out.
Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, that we're talking about Mexican cartel here, and millions of dollars worth of cash crop to them. So they're not going to be nice guys. They're going to be armed. They're going to be well equipped. I read your book, and which is outstanding, by the way.
Thank
I,
you.
I really suggest, Hidden War, how special operations game wardens are reclaiming American wildlands from the drug cartels. I got the audio book because I love audio, and you narrate it, which is really cool. That's something that isn't always done. Most of the time, authors don't go through that because it's time consuming, it's expensive, it's not an easy task by any stretch.
Right.
And yeah, I'm thinking to myself, this is stuff that I would think would be going on in a different country, not here. Why am I not here? Why isn't this on the evening news? I mean, you know, you know, your your partner got shot in one of these operations, right?
Yeah, in 2005, August 5th of 2005, Patrick, was the most, that was the day of all days that I remember in my career
Yeah.
more than any, because we didn't have the Met team yet. We were just starting to assist the sheriff's office with these raids, and we were right in the foothills of Los Gatos, the Silicon Valley, and looking down, from the rural town of Los Gatos, the mountains above it, at Cisco and eBay and Instagram and Facebook headquarters. And right behind us is this massive grow site
Wow.
in an area of a mountain that was a mile long and had 5 or 6 massive grow sites that the cartels had just been dominating that area under everybody's noses, including the park rangers and the agency there, for probably the better part of a decade. And it was harvest time, and there were some heavily armed and mentally prepared gunmen from the cartels in that grow site. And they got one shot off that went through both legs of my young warden partner from
Wow.
an AK-47, and we spent the next 3 hours trying to keep him, from bleeding out of 4 holes in his legs
Right.
and going into shock and dying. And that was an eye opener to the whole nation, because I was the first officer anywhere in the country that had ever been shot at and actually hit by a grower from these cartels, to show how dangerous they really were. And now we knew, hey, you know what, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is
Right.
not just, Cheech and Chong guys going up to grow a little bit of marijuana, make a little bit of money,
Yeah.
stay out of the way of law enforcement. These were hardened criminals that didn't want their cash crop tampered with, whether it was another gang group coming in, another cartel rival, or a law enforcement team. And that's what really led to what would later be the marijuana enforcement team that I wrote all about in Hidden War,
Hmm.
and why we were able to develop that team 10 years later, and how blessed we were to have the Chief Mike Carrion's blessing to kind of break tradition, go into a really progressive, unusual area for game wardens traditionally, even in California, which is very progressive overall as a conservation law enforcement agency,
Hmm.
and build what we built. And we're really lucky that we have, because we've been able to do it safely. None of our officers have been hurt since. We've had many more gunfights since, and a lot of physical encounters, a lot of canine stabbings, things like that from the cartels trying to take out our dogs. But in the end, with the tactical training, the dedicated mission, the support from administration, air assets like helicopters, and state of the art weaponry and night vision and capabilities, from everything from our snipers on the team to our advanced canine handlers, small unit tactics, and all of the good equipment we have to get around this state and work freely, changed the game significantly.
Yeah. So you identified a problem, and then you more or less spearheaded this special operations game wardens. This group. It, who trained you guys up? I mean, how did that come to fruition?
Well, it kind of started with a lot of us either having prior special operations military experience, like
Mm,
Frog, who you know from the book,
yep.
retired Navy SEAL, that I recruited to come onto the team. And, he's now overseen as chief of the entire cannabis enforcement program in California perfectly. But a lot of us, like myself and many of the operators, had been SWAT trained and tactically weapon trained in numerous areas, tactical tracking. I was a sniper instructor at that point with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office sniper unit, and was teaching other agencies and military basic and advanced sniper training through our curriculum over in the Silicon Valley. In the knowing that down the road our agency would need a team like this for some reason. We didn't know it was going to be cartel based or trespass grow based or in the cannabis world, but certainly that's what catalyzed going formal and not just having the skill sets and working with other agencies in the tactical community. So everybody that was recruited for this team were really good game wardens in the traditional sense, but they had a fondness and kind of a forte and a specialty in working with the sheriff's department or the Forest Service of going after these cartel growers. And we had a lot of previous training beforehand, but when we came together as a team, what I did as a team leader and what all of the instructors that were defensive tactics and firearms instructors and canine instructors on the unit, we were all going to more training, and we were training within the unit, developing our tactics and SOPs and
Mm,
protocols we wanted to operate and really operate like a military special operations small unit deployment. Because we're working in really tight confines, we're in the brush, we're trying to be stealthy, so we can't bring in an infantry battalion, let's say, from a military analogy. We have to bring in a small unit like a SEAL or a
sure.
Delta unit to go in, with 8 to 10 guys, maybe 12, maybe a scout team of only 4, and work under those same type of conditions. And that's how we trained. And we honed everything around how our dogs work, and everything around our equipment capabilities and limitations to
Sure.
be effective. And so far, so good. We haven't had any officers hurt or
Okay.
any dogs taken out from a cartel grower from violence to date.
Now, how do you utilize the canines? Yeah, that was a big part of your book, and I have I'm a dog lover. I whenever we had canines around, I'd always want to hang out with the canines. But I was a sergeant for 17 years, so I would never have one. On our department, it's just police officers and maybe a couple of detectives that are in vice that had the dope sniffing dogs, and maybe we have like one or two bomb sniffers.
Yeah.
But the meat and potatoes, the patrol dogs were assigned to a police officer that was their partner. So how did you utilize the canines for apprehension, for sniffing stuff out? I mean, like how did you use them?
Yeah, we were really we were lucky, Patrick, to have some amazing, amazing dogs. And I talk a lot about Canine Phoebe in Hidden War. I
Yes.
speak about her legacy a lot on my on my speaking and teaching platforms throughout the country, because she was kind of exemplary. And Belgian Malinois, 70 pounds, female, as social, as loving as my yellow lab, my retired companion canine who would never bite anybody in a grow. She might try to go get licks and, get the cartels to just, be peaceful, and put their guns down
Right.
for a lick and a pet. Right.
Right.
Um, but Phoebe was that social and she was that friendly, and she never bit an officer, but we called her the fur missile.
Mhm.
Kind of like a J dam, on the bottom of a jet, fire and
Yep.
forget with laser. Once she locked onto a target, and it was a deadly force target that was going to threaten us, she was all business. And that type of dog is what we needed on Met, just like our special operations brothers and sisters in the military, when they're fighting the global war on terror, need a good dog to interdict a bomb, an IED, a dangerous Taliban soldier that's going to ambush him with an
Yeah.
AK-47. Our dogs were sniffing out cannabis grows. They were sniffing out banned poisons. They were sniffing out guns and gun oils. So all of our, what we call a dual purpose dog, like Phoebe is or was, unfortunately she passed in 2018, my last year of operations, and a hard moment for all of us,
Oh,
as
sure.
you can imagine, because she had an amazing career,
Yeah.
saved my life and the life of my teammates hundreds of times over again,
Yeah.
without a doubt, and many other agencies, officers as well. But those are the dogs that make this job effective and positive and motivating, because they largely will, if they do have to do a bite apprehension, it's not going to be fatal, but they're going to stop a gunfight because they're going to put bite duress on a suspect that's pulling a gun,
Hmm.
that's going to try to shoot us or the dog. And it's going to end in an officer involved shooting where we have no choice but to engage, which is what happened in 6 previous gunfights before that we really had the dogs, on every mission. So they're a godsend that way. They are apprehension focused, but they're also great detection dogs as well. And we've had, I can't name them because they're still operational, but we've had a
Sure.
lot of, excuse me, really good other male and female Belgian Mals that have been operational or are currently operational on the team, doing great work, saving lives every day. And they, game wardens especially love dogs. We have dogs
Yep.
at home.
Sure.
We hunt with our dogs. We have pets. So it's just a natural kind of symbiotic relationship to have dogs at work with us. This just took it to more of a special operations level, like you might see with a SWAT unit using a
Hmm.
dog, or a military spec ops force with their dogs overseas. Ours are just, trained to deploy a little differently. And, we're not going out to try to have to, completely neutralize a suspect. We want to neutralize them from a safety standpoint, but it's not going to be a fatal encounter like it would if we had to get into a gunfight. And we never
Sure.
want to do that if we can avoid it.
So they can sniff out guns, they can sniff out the drugs, they can sniff out the bad guys. But what I find interesting is, like most dogs, they'll just start barking. And, obviously
Yeah.
that's not a good tactic, when you're trying to sneak up on somebody, but these dogs would stay quiet. How the hell would you do that?
That,
That's
that's a really
amazing.
good,
To me, that's amazing, or they see a squirrel. Like my dog would be gone. You'd be like,
yeah.
okay, oh,
Yeah.
squirrel or rabbit. Okay, I got to go get that.
That is the hardest part with a new dog that's got a lot of what we call ball drive, or will to go out, and they're just going to be a good apprehension dog. They've got the will, they've got the motivation, but to crawl into a grow site when it's dead silent in those wooded conditions and it's brushy and you're trying to creep through quietly,
Right.
and then you see suspects but you're trying to assess the situation, you're not going to make an instant takedown. And now we've got the dogs, laying down prone with us. We're observing, and sometimes they got to sit for hours
Wow.
because we're kind of in surveillance pre-apprehension mode, and it could be a long, long morning hunt, for everybody. And so
Sure.
there we are, and that dog starting to whine, getting excited, and then a grower does pop out, or another movement of an animal or something. And a lot of dogs are not quiet when they start their careers, and a
I
lot
can
of
see that.
missions do get compromised because of the noise a dog will make.
Yep.
It's just a lot of training and a lot of practice, and doing the training like it's live, having people dressed up in bite suits that look
Hmm.
like, say, a cartel trespass grower,
Sure.
going into a trespass grow site or a mock grow site that mimics the environment, having movement around the dog a lot, sitting for long periods of time, rewarding your canine for those sits, praising them not only for an apprehension, all those different things. And again, I'm not a dual purpose handler, but working around so many amazing dual purpose handlers that are Brian Boyd, for instance, who was Phoebe's handler, and other teammates that are still working met that I can't name
Sure.
specifically, doing amazing work. We learn from them, and they learn from their dogs. And now, since the program we really started back when Brian and Phoebe started this type of targeted enforcement of these cartel growers, it changed the excuse me. It, excuse me.
No problem.
It really changed the game for law enforcement everywhere doing this type of work. And because our dogs aren't really urban focused, they're not really like a rural sheriff's dog. They're going to be backcountry dogs, and they're going to be going through really, really arduous terrain, and they're going to have to stay hydrated, they're going
Yeah.
to have to stay quiet, they're going to have to not overheat. So it's a different game, it really is.
Yeah.
But we've got that kind of mastered on the West Coast. And now Forest Service, sheriff's departments, other allied agencies have apprehension dogs that are doing really good work in the trespass grow world, largely from all of us working together and seeing what Brian and Phoebe, kind of
Gotcha.
pioneered over a decade ago.
Cool. Now, in your book, you mentioned air support, which I would think would be vital in some of these operations. And that was the state police or sheriffs?
It was a mix of people. Air support
Okay.
came from, the biggest bird we ever worked with, and we loved working with it, was a big military pavehawk, which is, the mid-air refilling capable one with the
Okay.
field boom on it. From, it looks like a Black Hawk.
Yes.
And that was the 129th Aero Wing out of Moffett Field, or the Team Eagle guys over, in Central California. It was really cool to have the military, when they weren't deployed overseas fighting the war on terror, the Air National Guard could be over here doing domestic counter drug work. So we were working with the Pave Hawks, and I have many stories about that in both books. And not only bringing other military operatives to be on the ground with us, but also to use their ship for air support to get in and out of grows, to do a medical rescue if one of us are hurt, and to reclimate and bring thousands and thousands of pounds of grow waste and water diversion pipe and camp trash out in their big net loads when we reclimate and clean up a grow site. That really, really helped. The California Highway Patrol lent us a lot of help with airships before we had our own helicopters. Sheriff's departments, U.S. Forest Service, with contract helicopters. We worked with a number of ships, and helicopters are, kind of like the air cavalry in Viet Nam, man.
Sure.
They are an essential part of the mission to be effective, and really to get the most bang out of your buck for all levels: apprehension, eradication, and environmental reclamation effectively.
Now, one of the things that jumped out at me when I was reading your book was the use of booby traps. I mean, this is like Vietnam era booby traps
Right.
against for you guys and your dogs. Could you kind of go over that a little bit?
Yeah, we started to see, we've always seen some sort of, I call them more sedate booby traps that are more noisemakers and anti-personnel, like monofilament fishing line, really heavy gauge fishing line tied to cans and shakers, and, cans full of rocks, branches, that if we trip, excuse me, fighting some allergies up here.
No problem.
It doesn't help. I know we can edit. I might need a minute.
Yeah, here, you know what? I'm going to put it on pause right now. All right, so the booby traps. Could you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, we've seen noisemakers, Patrick, in grow
Yeah.
sites since the first grow site I ever went into in 2004 up in Silicon Valley. Oh, that was the second grow site. But um, in about 2015, we started to see like the punji pits up in Northern California, specifically um, one on a trail in a national park, actually, that would have taken anybody out outside of our law enforcement team, any hiker, anyone
Yeah.
trying to enjoy a national park trail. And it wasn't even right at the grow site. It was on a trail going to a grow site. And it was a Vietnam era punji pit that basically, is a kind of a 2 foot by 2 foot dugout hole in the middle of a trail. It's maybe 18 inches deep, and it's got sharpened sticks pointed straight up, and then a tarp over it with leaf litter to look just like the trail. So you're walking down this trail, then you step into this thing, and these
Wow.
sharpened sticks shear your foot. They go up, up your shin, up your side of your foot, up your ankle, calf, whatever. And what that was basically plagiarized from was the Viet Cong putting punji pits in Vietnam
Right.
on the trails and the Ho Chi Minh Trail and places like that, and then putting human excrement on the sharpened tips of those bamboo spears to induce infection from any cuts that our soldiers might fall into. Well, what these growers are doing is they're taking the EPA banned poisons like carbofuran, metaphos, what we call pink death, what the growers call El Diablo, which means the devil,
Yeah.
and putting that on the tips of the sticks to add a poison element, a toxic element to the stick. And again, Phoebe saved the day on that one because she smelled it and alerted that something wasn't right on the trail before
Oh.
one of our snipers from the sheriff's department in Shasta County almost stepped right into that when he was up on point. So, and that was one of probably 7 or 8 punji pits now that we've seen statewide back in California. Not to mention, metal wire and 550 cord snares that animals will walk through,
Oh,
and they'll get, kind of a noose around the neck. We've had anti-personnel snares in and around grow site kitchens and camps, processing stations, and some of these really large check dams that are basically giant holes, and they're covered up by tarps. Sometimes they put trash in them. Other times they hide them in the off season, or as they're setting up, that animals can fall into them and suffocate. Humans could humans could fall into them as well as we're going through a grow site if they're covered in brush. So you always have that threat. We're
wow.
not just looking for the armed gunman. We're looking for, poisonous toxics in the grow that can contaminate us any minute, and or the booby traps as well.
Wow. When I was reading your book, one of the many things, one of the many things that jumped out at me, the booby trap thing, I was thinking to myself, oh my God, that's like Viet Nam era, like that's craziness. That shouldn't be happening in our country, on our land. That's
Yeah.
insane. And another thing that kind of jumped out at me, which really kind of caught me off guard, was, you go into these grow operations and you see where, these people are living, and there's like religious shrines. Could you kind of go over that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah. We're talking about can we pause for 1 minute again?
Sure.
Sorry, bud. Yeah, talking about the patron saints, it's something we started to see in grow sites right from the early days. We just weren't really familiar with what they meant. And patron saint shrines, Patrick, they're kind of worship centers, if you will, in these outdoor grow sites. The cartels have them in their homes. We see them in stash houses. We see them all over the country, on cartels involved in things other than cannabis, like human trafficking, meth production, gun running, all the different crimes they're involved in. And what it is, and I have some pictures, obviously, in in Hidden War. Sorry, bud. I have to pause again. So these shrines are in the grow sites, and they could be a little tarp lean-to in the side of a dugout hill. They could be inside a tent, and they're going to have a lot of different candles, and they're glass candle figurines
Mm-hmm.
that they need to keep burning 24 hours a day to worship a particular patron saint. That by worshiping that saint in the beliefs of the cartels, they will be invisible to law enforcement. They will be blessed and go to heaven for their criminal behavior as a sanctioned thing that the cartels are blessed to do. And I know, you're Catholic, and I was raised Catholic as well. So a lot of our Catholic traditional saints are actually used by the cartels erroneously. And we're not digging any deity. I'm not digging anyone worshiping a patron saint or a different type of
Right.
religion. We're just talking about what the general narco trafficker cartel member is going to think in his mindset, so we understand who we're dealing with as an environmental public safety criminal. And I want to qualify that. But suffice to say, growing up with patron saints myself as a Catholic, of St. Jude, St. Romo, St. Mary, St. Christopher, some examples, we see some of those candles burning in the grow sites, that they are worshiping those same saints, knowing that, or believing that, those saints will also sanction their behavior, keep them invisible, and keep them blessed, in their endeavors. But then they have other saints that are new and fabricated, that don't have anything to do with our traditional Catholic saints, like
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Malverde, who was a figurine, was kind of a Robin Hood figure, helping the poor back in Mexico many, many years ago. And he's become one of the narco trafficker, cartels' main patron saints that they worship, thinking that they're kind of in a culture of chaos. They're kind of living remotely, and they're going to be blessed by keeping his candles and his figurines in their grow sites, the candles burning, so that they're invisible to us. We don't find their grow site. We don't interdict them on the highway. We don't find them at the stash house,
Okay.
and they're successful. Santa Muerte, the saint of death, which you see in a lot of publications, she is the other major patron saint for the cartels. And not everybody that worships Santa Muerte is a cartel member. In fact, for Day of the Dead celebrations and honorings in Mexico and in the Latin communities, she's a big part of that. But many, if not most, of the narco trafficking cartels worship Santa Muerte as being a prime saint, to keep them invisible from our operations. So when you see the skeleton with the skull, and
Mm-hmm.
she's kind of in the, the hood and the long gown, holding out a globe with the sickle in her skeleton hand and holding the globe of the earth. That's kind of an eerie, sinister kind of target indicator that we know we're on a cartel grow site. Or if we see any of those figurines on the person that we're dealing with, if we see it in a belt buckle, in a necklace, on a bracelet, a
Sure.
lot of cartel growers and operatives we've seen outside of grows are wearing some sort of jewelry that's a talisman to protect them right at the body for their activity. We see figurines in cars, we see them in basements and homes, and in very extreme cases, in some of these more aggressive cartels, they are doing human and animal sacrifices as offerings
Huh.
and doing beheadings and doing murders, not only in Mexico, but in the US as well, to get as much strength and power in their invisibility, in their successful production of their narcotics and distribution, or trafficking people, let's say. Really heinous, sinister stuff. And I've got a couple pictures in the book, and I'm teaching a lot on patron saints around the other classes I'm teaching to
Yes.
nationally, that some I show on a PowerPoint that will blow your mind. That, man, that was in a basement, and
Yeah,
there's,
right.
you
Well,
know,
we were talking before I hit the record button, and I got transferred to the south side of Milwaukee when I got promoted. And all of a sudden, I'm dealing with a different criminal element, and it was heavily entrenched with the Hispanic gangs. You know,
right,
Latin Kings, Spanish Cobras, MPs, you know, the list goes on and on. And we would do a raid on a house or just go into a house that's just infested with gangsters.
right,
You know, and they have all the tats, but they would also have like little shrines. And you know,
yep.
I grew up a good Irish Catholic boy, and
And
like,
you're
yeah,
seeing these shrines
the,
going, what are these?
exactly. I was just so I'd have to like pull one of my coppers off to the side that either grew up in the area or was policing there for some time. I'm like, okay, what gives? So they'd explain it to me, and I'm just like, okay, all right, whatever. This is all new to me, but okay, I'm taking your word for it here. So, yeah, unbelievable. You know, again, it's completely unbelievable what's going on. It's nuts. It's crazy. Uh, so you arrest somebody on the site. What do you do with them? I mean, if you got to hike them out, what, like, you know, a bunch of miles or whatever, you know, do you handcuff them behind their backs? I mean, what do you do with these people, and what jail do they wind up going to?
Yeah, it's always different. It's always a challenge. Sometimes if they are way back there, and let's say we've had a canine deployment and we have an injury from a canine deployment,
Right.
we're going to helicopter them out. We're going to
Okay.
bring in an airship and put them in a screamer suit, and they're going to go up on a long line just like we short
Oh,
haul out. But many times we've had to take multiple suspects kind of tethered together and carefully hike them out of a grow site the way we came in, and that's a long, hard day,
yeah, it
because
is.
you do have to keep them. You got to keep them handcuffed. A lot of them want to fight. A lot of them will take any opportunity to run. There's absolutely
Right.
nothing to lose, and it's real easy to get away and get lost in those forests, as dense as they are, and basically extend your apprehension detail by days, if not weeks, or you'll have to give up. And we've had a few escapes,
Sure.
and we learn from those escapes. So it's always a challenge, but if we have to take them out physically and hike them and put two guys on one suspect, where we're kind of escorting them as we're going up this arduous, slippery terrain,
Right.
we're going to take our time doing it. We're going to make sure the suspects are safe, they're hydrated, there's
Mm-hmm.
no injuries, and we're going to get them out of the woods, and then we're going to get them to whatever jurisdiction. We're going to book them in jail and go, and process from there, just depending on what county we're in, say in California, or if it's a federal case, where we're going to book them on the state level, to feed the federal case later on.
Okay. Cool. So obviously we're talking about cartels. This is organized crime, very well funded, organized, well trained, et cetera, et cetera. They're very very dangerous individuals. You know, have you or anyone in your team ever been targeted by the cartel?
I've had some fellow officers that actually had hits put out on them. Some sheriff's deputies and Forest Service LEOs that I
Yeah.
worked with in Lake County back in the day, because they had taken down one particular grow site, and they had been involved in an officer involved shooting with one of the cartel's, main men, let's say.
Yeah.
And that happened to some partners of mine, and that was an eye opener. Certainly, I've had a couple of interesting things on social media happen, but I've never had any, overt action taken on me or seen or had any overt threat come at me in a real formalized way.
Yeah.
But the flip side of it is being in the outreach and education business that I'm in, we have many, many levels of redundancy of security measures, no matter where I go throughout the country, what events I do publicly. We do security workups.
Okay.
I have a lot of eyes and ears out. I'm always prepared. I'm always equipped properly. We'll just leave it at
Right.
that.
Sure.
And everybody around me is as well. One thing I don't do is I don't put out any sensitive information, classified intel that my law enforcement brothers and sisters or military brothers and sisters are using for this cartel fight. I keep things pretty generic for the sake of
Sure.
public safety to get the message out, and that also, stuff you can find other public sources, if you will, outside of my personal experiences to minimize that risk. But my ultimate goal, Patrick, has always been with this thin green line upon retirement is to educate and inform as far and wide as I possibly can to this environmental and public safety present threat we have from Mexico through the cartels that are embedded in every state of our great nation. And being a lover of wildlife, waterways, and wild lands, it hits me very deeply, emotionally and personally as well, not just professionally, when they destroy our environment, but to see what they're doing to our public's health with, the dirty narcotics out of these dirty labs, this fentanyl, these prescription opioids that are killing kids by the thousands all over the country, especially in your part of the country in the
Oh
eastern
yeah.
side. It's just horrendous. And to know that this toxically tainted cannabis is still out there everywhere and people are ingesting it, and certainly it's not doing good for them on a
Sure.
long, slow effect. And the cartels don't care. They don't care
No.
about
No.
human health. They don't care about health standards and safety.
You're
They don't
right.
care about environmental purity. They look at our country and our people as an expendable, marketable commodity, and it's eroding us from within, no exaggeration. And we look at everything from domestic border protection and security, the geopolitical climate of the entire world right now, and certainly, enemies of our state that don't want to see us succeed. And we have one embedded right now working within our own country, and that's not an exaggeration. So I just appreciate being able to talk about it with you today, um, especially coming from your, thin blue line background in law enforcement, being a first responder and having dealt with it, yourself personally. Because as you said, these guys are everywhere. And they're in every type of different level of crime outside of just the toxically
Oh
tainted
yeah.
cannabis world.
Absolutely. So, you're risking a lot. You're risking literally life and limb trying to help out the environment. Obviously they're breaking the law. And from reading the book, it's like California, and I don't like getting into politics all that much, but, obviously very liberal and with their laws regarding, well, a lot of stuff. But, they keep on lessening and lessening the punishment for these
Yeah.
crimes. It almost gets to the point. It's like, why even risk so much when you don't have the backing from federal and state courts?
Yeah, it's it's an uphill battle for sure. And we've seen that on, my old home state of California with the sanctuary state doctrine and um, courts not really prosecuting some of these cartel criminals that we've run across. And I had a real bad experience that hit us all pretty hard that I talk about in one of the last chapters of Hidden Wars, you
Mm-hmm.
remember. Um, and it's one of those things where we have a motto on the Met team that I talk about in the book, and that is fill and flow. And it's kind of our thin green line version of improvise, overcome, and adapt. Or the quote I like that I've used many times when I've been down and out and frustrated is do the best you can with what you have where you're at. And honestly, that's all we can really do. I mean, if politically we're going to have laws that are going to protect these cartels, we at least got to try to stop them in the act in the minute. Because
Sure.
every time we go into a grow site and we stop these guys from diverting water, from putting toxically tainted poisons into the waterways, from killing wildlife, even if they're not going to get prosecuted, and we're probably going to see them in another grow site, as frustrating as that is, We know that by that one grow we took out, we just cost that group millions and millions of dollars.
Sure.
We put a dent in their enterprise. We kind of won the fight of them getting over and taking advantage of the American public for profit. But the main thing we did in that is we stopped environmental damage from continuing.
Okay.
And we're going to go reclimate that, right? And we're going to clean up the damage. And we know from, a debrief I got to sit in on with DEA and partners from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office that I talk about in chapter 4 of Hidden War, when we, basically had a high level plaza boss, if you will, in a cartel organization running grows all throughout California and other states, busted for a methamphetamine violation. We learned that by reclamating these sites, very unlikely, if at all, that these cartel guys are going to come back in and use that grow site again, because they know it's on our radar and
Sure.
they know they're going to have to put tens of thousands of dollars of infrastructure back in, more water line, go find a water diversion, put a lot of effort into it, and they still might not get away with it. So we know we're making a dent. Are we stopping the problem? No way. Are we putting a dent in it? Yes. We're
Okay.
getting really good on the West Coast. East Coast teams are developing. Midwest teams that have it to a lesser extent are developing. Um, but we're never going to beat it under the current laws, under the current mindset, unfortunately.
Right.
But we're just going to make the best dent we can, and just know and look for the personal and professional rewards of today. We took back some environment. We saved some wildlife, and
Gotcha.
we probably saved some human lives that aren't going to ingest a toxic product. And we'll just worry about tomorrow. That's the best
Sure.
we can do. And
Okay.
and that still feels good on every mission, brother. It really does.
Absolutely.
We knew we had that challenge we were up against, when we started Met, because we knew based on the politics of the Golden State, it was going to be an oxymoronic, scenario.
Right.
We were going to be fighting the cartels, but at the same time trying to legitimize cannabis and get the good grower community on track. And and now the black market's blown up in that state, not because of legitimate cannabis and growers doing it wrong, but because of the incentive for the criminals to continue to do it wrong. That's been the big problem. And we know that. And maybe that'll change. We'll be optimistic and just keep doing the job.
Gotcha. Now, one of the many things that jumps out at me with all this is where's the DEA in all of this? We're talking about $1 million, crops of illegal, marijuana, and they're heavily armed. They got booby traps. They're organized. This is criminal, enterprising. Where's the feds? Where's the DEA with all this?
Yeah, DEA, other than funding through the DCEP grant and giving us dollars to operate each state at the state level, they weren't necessarily active previously many years ago in doing the smaller cannabis operations, because again, the white dope narcotic problem nationwide was really taking a lot of their time.
Okay.
But I've noticed, and in good relationships I have with especially the West Coast DEA units and their special agents in charge of a good part of the West Coast and the Southwest, they've taken attention and concern over the environmental crimes, both indoors and outdoors, of the cannabis trade, the illegal black market cannabis trade. And not only the cartels, but the Russian and Armenian gangs and the Chinese and the
Sure.
Asian gangs doing all those crimes as well. And now moving indoors and just doing water stealing and using toxics on the cannabis in the water, indoors under a regulated state situation. So they are taking notice. They're quantifying that. They're funding teams that are doing good environmental restoration work. We have a great relationship with the DEA on the California Department of Fish and
Okay.
Wildlife Law Enforcement Division, especially the Cannabis Enforcement Program arena, and many other states do too. And I'm highlighting a lot of their good support right now. We've had Bill Bodner, who's the special agent in charge of the whole LA office. He was actually on our Thin Green Line podcast not long ago, and was very candid about not only the toxically tainted cannabis problem continuing with the cartels under regulation, but also methamphetamine, these counterfeit opioids, the fentanyl problem. And DEA is looking at it comprehensively now, at least what I'm seeing from the West Coast attack,
Mm.
on public safety and health and human safety concerns. And
Okay.
that's really, really cool to see. And that they've noticed the environment and they're starting to quantify and use those figures to show that this is an environmental problem as well,
Gotcha.
not just a narcotics or a drug problem for human safety.
All right. Now I have some questions here from one of my patrons, Kathleen Donnelly.
All right.
All right. Let's see here. Some of this we've already answered. Uh, for the canine, are they tracking the hottest scent when going after a suspect? Do they use a scent article, or is the dog trained to track both ways?
That is a really good question. And basically, we don't often have an article. Sometimes we'll get an article in a campsite
Yeah.
or a grow site or a kitchen, let's say, or processing area, if we're doing a long track. Most of the time, though, it's going to be a hot scent of what's right in front of us because we don't do a whole lot of long tracks just because of the logistics of the day and the mission and all the stuff that has to get done. And also sending a canine team way out to do a really long track on a grower that could be pulling him or her into an armed ambush somewhere without a whole team to support them while we're back at a grow site trying to hold suspects, make sure no suspects come in from behind or come in to flank us, and secure a whole grow site can be very difficult. So usually it's a hot track and our dogs are scenting right away when we get close to that grow site,
Okay.
and they go right off of that.
I know. Speaking with Kathleen, say there's a homicide, in an area. It wouldn't have to be necessarily a grow site. Who would be doing that investigation? Who would be in charge of that?
For our agency, and we found a homicide,
Yeah.
it would just depend on the jurisdiction we're in. Probably most of the time at the state level, it's probably going to be a sheriff's department.
Okay.
Definitely. We have found bodies in grow sites before.
Mm-hmm.
We've found, rival cartels, shallow graves, things like that. That has happened. We've shown up to a grow site that's been abandoned, and there is a deceased cartel grower, in a tent. And right away that becomes, the local
Okay.
mainline law enforcement's jurisdiction, typically the sheriff's office. Yeah.
So the sheriff would take care of that. All right. Let's see what else we have here. If my character, Forest Service law enforcement and canine handler, was out working and came across a marijuana grow, what would the protocol be? How would she handle this to stay safe? And how would an average civilian out hiking handle this to stay safe?
Yeah, a great question that I was gonna point out. First thing they're gonna want to do is they're gonna just want to, if they can document what they see, take a picture on your cell phone. Most cell phones, if you have the tracker, activated on your phone, you're going to get a coordinate and then back out the way you came in. There's no reason to continue to go down a trail into a grow site to follow a water line because you're likely to run into perhaps armed gunmen.
Yeah.
You don't want to see that. You don't want to be out
Right.
there alone if you are a solo ranger or a Forest Service LEO with your dog. And then you're just going to want to get with your agency, or you're going to want to call the sheriff's office or your game warden and let them know, hey, this is what I found. Who do I report it to? And we're going to put a team together, whether it's like in California, would be our Met team, let's say, on a
Yeah.
trespass grow, but it might be the sheriff's office. It might be a compilation of, if it's on Forest Service, it'll be Forest Service with sheriffs with game wardens. It'll be a big, force multiplier group of allied agency team members to probably go handle that grow site and process it appropriately.
Okay.
So that's the best thing. Document it, get a good location for us, and make a call as soon as you get out of the woods.
All right. The same character. Are there any scenarios where the same character would have to have the dog track without a backup officer? How would the handler do that? Off leash or with leash, so they'd have their weapon drawn, but they'd still have to watch their dog.
Yeah, I just don't see that scenario happening. If they went into a grow site by themselves and stumbled on it, and the dog alerted, that officer would make a mental note, doing the smart
Sure.
thing, and back out of there. Um, and we don't do the off leash tracks very much, and
Mm,
I'm not going to speak too much for my experts.
sure.
The handlers that I work personally with and have worked with. It's a very fine line before we do a long line deployment and an off leash deployment, and how long we're going to let that track go. And because the cartels have done counter tactics now where they have a fixed blade, they draw the dog in on a bite, stab for the jugular,
Hmm.
and they've taken out a couple of Forest Service dogs that way that have not made it. We're very, very careful on how we deploy our dogs and how far out we let them go without us being right with them. Because again, that dog is a partner, that dog is a viable life-saving member of the team, and we're not going to be reckless with that dog's life.
Right. In an urban environment, I was always the first to volunteer because you'd have like say an entry or you're going after a bad guy,
Right.
and the handler would go in with the dog. Usually the dog would be on a longer leash. They had different size leashes for
Right.
whatever job they were
Right.
going to be doing, and sometimes they would let them loose, but they always wanted a backup officer. It was another set of eyes, but you didn't want a ton of cops in there because it's going to confuse the dog.
Right.
So I would always volunteer, and it's like, and usually the officer that had the dog was trained, by our SWAT department, or there were previously a SWAT member, that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
there would be a flashlight on the pistol, which comes in handy big time.
Right.
So that frees up your other hand. And I never realized how cool it was and how handy it was until I got trained up and got a light on my SIG, and
Game
I'm like,
changer, huh?
oh
Yeah.
my god, this is awesome. Oh my lord, it's just you have another arm to do stuff with. It's like, okay, this makes total sense. So that's the way we would do it. It was situational, and yeah, your gun would be drawn, and again, we would always have like one other like cover officer, and that was again another set of eyes. But you don't want to confuse the dog with too many people.
Exactly, exactly. And really when we do apprehensions and grow sites, it kind of follows from that suit. We want that dog to have eyes ahead of us because they're sitting much lower. We always want to have, a canine cover officer. That was my role a lot before, I started Met and got involved with that with all the guys. And I was Brian's canine cover officer, handgun armed only, with rifle support all around us, to deal with any apprehension scenario. Should I have to handle the dog? Should I have to support the main handler, Brian, during an arrest, or just have hands free to move trail barriers out and make it quiet for us to continue our stalk? So all those things come into play. And yeah, weapon lights on handguns, game changer.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And streamlining our kits where we don't have to carry another light to work the gun and things like that, right? And minimalize the weight and the bulk and the presence we have when we're going into these really tight wooded confines, if you will, of these grow site environments. Real all those things come into play and really help.
okay. All right. So let's see here. I know we were talking before I hit record about hunter safety courses. I know this is
Yes.
a little off course, but I I can't be more excited about them. It doesn't mean that you have to be a hunter to take them.
Right.
For kids to learn about, conservation, to learn about guns. Like guns, you're indifferent to guns, you hate guns, it doesn't matter. They're most likely going to have contact with a firearm in their lives, and it's nice that they know what's safe, what isn't, what should they do. Or basic like handling of a firearm, they might actually have to do that. So, did you guys do like hunter safety courses?
Yeah, I'm really you hit it on the head, Patrick. And I've never had I haven't really got to talk about hunter safety in one of these podcasts under the subject matter. So thank you for bringing it up. Hunter safety education. When I taught hunter safety as a game warden, well, I actually coordinated a junior essay contest annually in California where the winner would get a lifetime hunting license, and we do an awards ceremony for him at a
Cool.
sportsman's expo every year, to promote just our next generation coming into conservation awareness. And you hit it on the head when you said you don't ever have to hunt, you don't ever have to shoot a gun. You'll still benefit from a hunter safety course because you'll learn conservation, you'll learn habitat, you'll learn first aid, you'll learn all these things. And in some states like California, where you have to have a basic, firearm safety certificate to buy a gun, your hunter education certification can get you that in many
Right.
cases,
Yep.
which is, and maybe you never hunt with it. But what I do find is, and I have a lot of youth I mentor, nationally, and I have a young man that is up and coming, about to graduate high school, already destined to go to basic training,
Mm,
wants to be a sniper in the military, working a part-time job at a grocery store, looking after his dad. I mean, just a great kid. And up until we met, he was so fascinated by shooting a firearm, for one, that he had never done. And then secondly, by going on a hunt. And now he's gone through, a physical hunter safety class and doing his own online right now. And we'll take him on his first hunt and harvest his first wild hog, hopefully here in the next couple of weeks, and get him trained and safe, not only for his military career, let's say, coming up, but just for the overall awareness of the thin green line of conservation. And I'm using this story as an example of why I think any young American would benefit from the class. And they're so easy to do now because in the COVID era, most states have gone to an online class. And then you don't have to do shooting past the written test until you go out with a mentor or you go to another class if
Mm.
you want to. But you can actually get the certificate online just from going through the academics, which is really beneficial. You'll get the basics, and then you'll know if you want to go out and
Sure.
inquire about a hunt with a mentor, with a hunter safety instruction class, whatever the case may be. But definitely, brother, one of the most rewarding, top 5 things I got to do throughout my entire career. And even when I went into special operations with the Met team, I still did hunter safety classes. I still, ran that youth essay contest until I retired and, had to pass the buck. And I think it's the most valuable, one of the top most valuable things game wardens need to be involved in and passionately committed to is not only teaching hunter education themselves, but developing hunter education instructors within their particular state. And that is a big part of every conservation organization in each state. That's a big part of what we do, because we're just losing hunters and anglers, by the hundreds and thousands a lot throughout the country as we
Mm.
become more urbanized and we
Yeah.
get generationally disconnected. One thing we did see, brother, that was really one of the positives and one of the few positives we saw through the start of the pandemic nightmare 2 years ago was a 30 to 40% increase in hunter education class participation online
Mm.
from traditional non-hunter, non-gun owners nationwide.
Yeah.
And the number of previously anti-gun folks that were buying firearms for the first time for personal safety in case they had to hunt for subsistence, with the supply chain possibly being eliminated with what our crazy situation is
Yeah,
right
it
now
changed
on the
some
planet.
mindsets, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of benefits to it, and yeah, I actually encourage it, and they're a lot of fun to take.
Okay, speaking of favorite parts of the job, looking back, what was your favorite part and maybe not so favorite part of the job?
um I'll say my not so favorite part just to get it out, and
Sure.
then I'm going to talk about a lot of favorite parts because I was very, very blessed to have an incredible 30-year career. I don't think I could have planned it better. I don't think I could have foreseen, the curveballs and the direction
Sure.
into bed at the end and all that. But I think the hardest thing to deal with is politics in any job.
Yeah.
And when you have so many wildlife officers that are just dedicated to protecting wildlife and human safety at the highest level, and getting roadblocked from that due to political agendas that we can't control, and having to work within those politics, that was the most difficult part of the job. But it's just the way things go, right? Politics are everywhere.
Sure.
You got to, again, do the best you can with what you have where you're at. And as we say on the Met team, don't be too frustrated, play to the strengths. Don't try to go through the wall of politics, go around it, fill and flow, do the best job you can, and you're still going to make a dent. And that was the way to keep my attitude positive and always convey positive motivation to the guys that worked for me or the guys I worked around, let's say.
Yeah.
Um, Now, talking about the favorite parts of the job, we don't have enough time in the day unless we're going to do
Okay.
5 podcasts. But and I'm glad to do those with you.
Yeah.
But I can say this: the and I'm going to go to the traditional examples from when I was a patrol warden doing traditional stuff, and then go into the special ops side. And on the traditional front, it was making a case on a career poacher criminal that had not been caught by any game warden, any sheriff, had been kind of doing this, thumbing his nose, at how
Yeah.
they'll never catch me, behind my locked gate, baiting deer, or whatever, and putting up a dedicated, organized, effective operation that might take months, and making that bust on somebody that was absolutely a wildlife destroyer and absolutely arrogant about it. Those cases felt the best. They were the biggest rewards because they were the hardest effort. And we made a lot of good cases doing that. And a lot of the guys and gals that I did those cases with or brought in were people that were later working special operations with me on the marijuana enforcement team and the cannabis enforcement program as it developed. Those were highlights. And when I think the thing I miss the most, I just miss my brothers, from the team.
Sure.
And I miss working with the dogs. And I get to talk to them a lot, train with them sometimes, see them in action, hear the war stories. And and I feel really good being able to send their message wider and larger without, any political, restrictions or any type of, don't tell, don't do,
Right.
now, which is really cool. But man, I miss that. You just can't be that close to a true brotherhood as you know, as tight as we are on that team, and not miss them, and not miss the missions, and not worry about, and just have it in the back of your mind, where are they at today? Am I going to get that call, to the team leader, lieutenant that replaced me, that one of our guys got hurt or one of our dogs got taken out? Those hold your breath moments.
Sure.
But I miss those days. I miss those days a lot, and I always will. Just because, we well, from being a sergeant and as a lieutenant, and I didn't promote above lieutenant because I really didn't think I'd be passionately committed to being in administration at that level. And I wanted to be in the field and lead from the front, and I wanted to be there for my people. And it's not better than any other choice. It's not right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just the reason I stayed a lieutenant through retirement was to be effective in the field and be close to my guys. And conversely, now that I'm not and retired from that, certainly I miss that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how is retirement? What do you think of retirement?
you know um
Because we're
Retirement
we're
isn't.
around the same age. We're around the same. I did 25 years. You did 30. I think we're pretty close to the same age. There's some similarities there. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
interested to see
no,
what your take is.
yeah, kindred spirit. I'm happy, and I'm really happy in retirement because it doesn't feel retired. I did not anticipate being this busy, but I'm literally as busy as if I was still running the Met unit. But I'm doing it in things like podcasts and book education and speaking and teaching and presenting, across the country and stuff. I've even joined, I'm big into music, and I've joined a cover rock and roll band up here, friends
Sweet.
that have wanted me in Montana for years. And I told them I'd give it a go when I retired. And we're
Yeah.
Area 56 up here in the 56 county, a little Lincoln County, Montana, and we're gigging 10 to 15 times a year. And
Nice.
it's a lot of work to, be good in a rock band. It's just like practicing on the range and putting a team together. So
Right.
I have a lot of new teams that I'm involved in, still connected with my old teams. So retirement is going really well. But I can say this, and I'm sure I think we could probably share this sentiment. If we didn't have purpose that continued on the thin blue and the thin green lines, I would not be, I would have hit that wall, and it would have been a hard hit. Going from the high speed, low drag pace of running an elite spec ops unit. And we were nonstop on every level, from training to deployment to
Sure.
outreach, and then hit that wall. And now I have one truck, not two, in the driveway. I have one computer, not two, one cell phone, not two. And I don't have to go to work tomorrow, and I don't have to check on my guys, and I don't have to process an ops plan or go to training or teach. That would be a tough thing. And I mean, Patrick, think about from your standpoint, how would that affect, how would you feel if we didn't have this, and the ability to share that message?
Yeah, you're right about that. My podcast, I started out, I thought, well, I'll do a couple episodes and that'll be
Yeah.
it. And now this is like number 63 or 64, I
I
think, or
love it,
whatever.
man. Yeah.
I've written the books. I'm starting to do public speaking. I've gone, one of my old lieutenants is a college professor now. That's what he did when
Nice.
he retired. And he had me go talk to his class. Just doing stuff like that, it keeps me engaged. And, people are actually reaching out to me. They want to be on the show, or, hey, there's this writers conference. Can you speak at it? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I love writers. I love independent writers. And I love the ones that want to get their facts straight. It's never going to be 100%. You're writing fiction.
Right.
There's some artistic license there, and there should be,
Yeah.
but they should know where true north is on the compass.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
so that's the way I look at it. But one thing that really hit me when I retired, and the timing couldn't have been worse. My last day on the job was January 16 of 20,
Okay.
and that's when everything was kicking off.
That was when things were getting Western. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, and I had just a boatload of survivor guilt.
Yeah.
Where I'm watching on TV, my guys getting rocks and bottles thrown at them. The district that I used to work at, there's like crews with Molotov cocktails coming at them, and I'm not there. They're
Yeah.
working 16, 20-hour days,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting at home in my recliner, and I'm like, that's not right. I
Yeah,
should
it
be
feels.
out with them. And
Mhm.
it drove me nuts. I didn't sleep. It took me a long time to wrap my head around it. So, have you ever experienced anything like that?
You hit it on the head, brother. I remember I had retired in 2018 at the very end, so I had a couple years before the COVID drop. But within a week of the lockdown starting, I had been in California, migrated back up home to Montana, not knowing if I would ever go back to the West Coast. Honestly, with the
Yeah,
state of the world, and I was on the phone with the new lieutenant that replaced me and my good friend Shang, as he's codenamed in the book, in Hidmore, just on what's going on down there. Are you guys okay? And getting updates, because I felt like not only are the cartels going to go on overdrive now because they're going to thrive on this pandemic, and
sure.
sure enough, they did. And Met was underwater like the year we did the pilot program in 2013. It was the Wild West out there, but they were the only guys going out there and doing anything. Everybody was on lockdown, and even they were on lockdown for a while. And I knew that it was going to get really, really dangerous for them. And so I needed to have contact and just know everybody was okay. And I started to feel a little bit of, man, if I've ever missed being in the field with the guys, the shit's hitting the fan now, no pun intended. And I wish I was back there.
Yeah.
And that was, yeah, March of 2020, when things were just getting crazy, you know?
Yep. Yeah, my wife is just like, you've been through riots before.
Yeah.
You've had people shoot at you. You've had, bottles and rocks thrown at you. You've put in the 16, 18, 20-hour days. You've done it. It's time for to let somebody else do it. And I'm like,
Yep.
no. It just
Yeah.
it
I'm not
really
ready.
stuck in me. I'm like, hell
Yep.
no. I'm ready to, throw all my shit back on and go out there. And she's like, no, you're not. And I'm like,
Yeah.
fine. And you just have to take that breath and it's like, okay. But that was real. But yeah, that sucked. So the books, you got Hidden War,
Yep.
and you wrote a few more. Now those were very specific to like what we've just been talking about. You ever think about writing fiction?
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I've kind of been,
I think that'd be fun. With your background, I think that'd be pretty cool.
it would, and I'm inspired. I mean, I have a sniper background on the team and being an instructor. And I think about our, mutual, you mentioned Jack Carr, and both coming from a sniper background and seeing what he's doing on the fictional side and being influenced by Stephen Hunter, who is, kind of an influence of Jack Carr and myself, and
Mhm.
his ability to articulate the sniper craft into great stories is just fascinating to me. So I'm dabbling with the idea. There's a couple of nonfiction things that are still in development. We are down to literally the last 300 copies of the first big run of Hidden
Oh,
War hardcovers,
okay.
and those are going to go real quick here in the next couple months. And then we're ramping up for a second edition of Hidden War that's a new book. It's going to have new material, a new cover design, and it's going to complement the Call Sign Trailblazer documentary that is being produced and filmed. We're in production right now of telling this whole story from conservation nationwide to the Met threat to the cartel threat and what faces America now through my personal and professional backstory. And again, a group of military, veteran, and law enforcement producers that reached out, a conglomeration of great producers,
Yeah.
great musical composers, cinematographers, to capture this thing correctly. And we're going to be working the new book, the new edition of Hidden War, with the release of the first of what will likely be two documentary films, a short and a long film, later this fall, first part of next spring. So
What are those going to be called? The documentaries?
it's called Call Sign Trailblazer.
Call Sign Trailblazer, and what channel or who? Where? If I want to watch this, where is it going to be?
Well, first of all, we're going to hit with the first film. We're going to be at Sundance and North by Northwest at the film festivals. And then it's going to go to one of several streaming services that have
Okay.
already inquired. But we want to do the film festival route with the short film. And then the longer film will go to a streaming service, not yet known. We've got inquiries from three good ones. It's
Hmm.
kind of doing the pick and choose right now and getting through production. And I'll keep everybody up to date on all that through my social media,
Yeah.
on Instagram,
Yeah.
on
Let us know for sure.
yep.
So you're
And
not really retired.
no,
You're
sir,
you're
not.
busier actually. Sounds like.
And Patrick, the other thing, I'm quite a blade guy, as I know you've probably seen on the website, but I've got the signature thin green line, and now we have the thin blue line Trailblazer folder
Oh, cool.
that I'm doing some book packs with. I do a
Yeah.
combo triple threat pack, and cops, law enforcement, first responders, civilians just that want a knife that's got a glass breaker, a seatbelt cutter, a good blade that can skin, gut, survive, or whatever the case may be. And we ran out of the first run of 1,000 almost instantly within a couple months of COVID dropping, and we're finally, with the supply chain problem for good steel, right into our second batch of knives. Should anybody want a blade or a book or a personalized package of both, they can reach out to me through my website, which is just www.johnnorris.com, JOHNNORES.com. And you'll get to my email. You can direct message me on Messenger. I'm John Norris on Facebook. And on Instagram, I'm at John Norris, JOHNNORES, and can direct message me there. And
Okay.
certainly, if anybody has inquiries about the profession, being a game warden, hunter education, or anything that I can help with from the standpoint of the public safety and environmental protection work, we're really both doing, brother, with all the good work you're doing on the podcast. Just reach out to me via email or direct message on either social media platform, and we'll go from there. I also have a YouTube channel, the John Norris YouTube channel, that has documentaries we've already done, the pilot film of my Thin Green Line film series I host and produce for Recoil TV. Recoil Magazine, Gun Digest Magazine are part of the publishing brand that are Caribou, the book version of
Okay.
that group for Hidden War. And I'm also a staff writer, and I do writing for both many of those magazines around weapons and testing, being
Mm.
a kind of a gadget guy, and the issue. So don't hesitate to reach out, and certainly if you want a book or a blade or both, I do personalized packs as requested, and send in some Thin Green Line extras for the personal people that reach out.
Very cool. I was going to ask you where people can learn more about you and your books, but you just answered it, so that's cool. I guess I have now the knife. Did you say that was cold steel?
Yeah, this is actually D2 high carbon stainless that we use, which is really a working steel. And I am a brand ambassador for V Knives. It's a company that Mike Vellicamp is the founder and CEO of, and my good friend. Mike was the individual that started and ran the factory for Spyderco for the first 15 years.
Okay.
So, and Spyderco is an icon, massive company, as you know. Mike's got his own brand now because he's designed knives for so many different people over the years. And We Are V Knives. And he was the one that wanted to make a signature blade to my specs and help me design and distribute it, that was really made for the perfect knife that I never had through 30 years of law enforcement
Sure.
in any level. So that's why we made the Trailblazer the way it is.
Very
Got the
cool.
thin green line color. We're doing some with thin blue line and thin red line in this next batch.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
doing partially serrated and non-serrated. And it's just a quick high-speed folder on a single cam ball bearing.
Yeah.
It's legal. It's not spring assisted, and it comes in at a price point that operators can afford.
Okay.
We have a lot more expensive knives in our line and cutting products. You can go to vknives.com to look at that. I also have a line of my fixed blade Trailblazer thin green lines that are going to complement this, dropping in 2 months.
Okay.
And I'll have all that up on social media, but I do have folders if people want them. And anyone has inquiries about V Knives, feel free to reach out.
All right. Very cool. I was going to ask you one more thing. Uh, and I was going to ask you earlier, but we just got, I just go off in different directions. That's the way I am.
Well, it's easy when there's so much good things to talk about, right?
That's true. What do
Yeah.
you think the impact of legalizing marijuana has on these operations? And what are your personal feelings on it, if you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. Regulation has been done in a bunch of states, and it hasn't quite been done right. I talk about this in the last chapter, Hidden War, coming from the weed capital of the world,
Right.
and California being one of only 6 true Mediterranean climates on the globe. Just like the Napa Valley wine you hear about all over the world, we grow great wine grapes, and we can grow great cannabis.
Sure.
And we knew we were going to have recreational regulation. We've had medicinal
Hmm.
regulation for almost 20 years now. But one of the things I did as the lieutenant of the Met team, 30% of my job was outreach and education. And I presented to legislative groups, lobby groups, in addition to cannabis grower groups coming out of the dark to get legal, trying to bring this thing together. And one thing I said is, if you're going to regulate, great, just regulate so that you do not incentivize a black market. What you want to do is deter the black market And definitely, if cannabis growers are doing it legally and they're putting organic, pure products on the market and they're regulated, paying their taxes, going seed to sale, all those different protocols, fine. That's not, regardless of where I sit personally, it doesn't even
Mhm.
matter. Let's just do it that way. But let's make sure we keep the felonies and all the big sanctions against trespass growers, cartel or otherwise, that are doing it illegally. And unfortunately, in California, to get those votes passed, and because of some politics and revenue agendas, with most likely, that law got watered down to trespass growing for cartels got watered down to a misdemeanor when Prop 64 passed. And for a juvenile grower, and the cartels bring up their juvenile apprentice under 18 years old, literally in our grow farms all over California, we've seen it. It's an infraction. It's like a seatbelt ticket.
Wow.
So what did the cartels do, or any private, or any other outside of cartel, illegal cannabis trader? They just went, hey, why are we going to regulate? We're not going to get prosecuted. If we do, it's going to be a misdemeanor. We're not going to go to jail. Maybe we're going to lose our plants, but it's just like the old days of the cost of doing business where, we put out 10 grows in a cartel organization, law enforcement hits 5 of them, and we still made hundreds of millions of dollars on the other
Sure.
6. So my problem with regulation is, as I've seen it nationwide, is it's not being done correctly, and it needs to be completely reformed if we're going to regulate. And if we're going to regulate, we need to look at federal regulation like the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms manage tobacco and alcohol. It's really the only logical way that you're ever going to have a standardization where you're going to hopefully significantly reduce the activity of these cartel groups and anybody else that's stealing millions of gallons of water, especially in drought-ridden states, with water becoming, one of the most precious commodities on the globe right now, with so many water issues globally, not just nationally.
Right.
That's kind of it in a nutshell. I speak in depth on this stuff and present on it, but that's the problem we've seen firsthand. And I know you can relate, brother, to the fact that when we're out there risking our lives, going up against armed cartel growers and playing whack-a-mole, knowing they're not going to stop because California is a sanctuary for them now under the way the law is written, that's a problem. So I'm speaking a lot today and on a lot of news outlets that that have inquired about what's going on with California Prop 64. Why is the black market out of control? We're 5 years into regulation, and the cartels almost run half those towns all
Right.
over California. And
Well,
I have to
like
be honest and say, this is why it's not working, and we advise against it.
my friends and like my kids and the kids' friends are like, yeah, once it's legalized, it's no big deal. There's always going to be a black market, and
Right.
like you said, if you don't do it right, that black market's going to flourish, and that's where kids are going to die from fentanyl, in their
Yep.
frickin' weed, and
Yep.
you're pouring money into criminal organizations who also do human trafficking, who
Right.
do all these other horrible, horrible things that I've seen firsthand. It's not, yeah. I guess it's very frustrating. It's like, no, it's not this passive little, oh, no big deal, blah blah
Yep.
blah. Yeah, it kind of is, and like you said, I think eventually it will be legal, but it's just doing it the right way, like you
Yep.
said.
No, you're hitting it absolutely on the head. You get it. And what you just said hit a nerve even deeper that I didn't mention, and I'm glad you did, is when you think about if you regulate poorly like we did in, again, California is that litmus test. We're the example for the world on water use and for cannabis. We just are. And we had an opportunity to do this so right, and we did it so wrong. And sadly, when you do incentivize a black market, you are feeding in and basically complementing all those other crimes, right? You're putting money into the organization on the black market that is making fentanyl, killing so many on the East, especially, and the, methamphetamine. And you said it, human trafficking more than anything, right? So it is a problem, and we need to keep addressing it until hopefully a change is made. And I think you said that well. Appreciate that.
All right, I think this is a good place to end our talk. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all this. This is really a great interview. I appreciate this.
I appreciate you, Patrick. Great show. I know we had scheduling conflicts mostly on my end, and we would have done this sooner. I'm glad we got to talk today, and I look forward to talking to you and working with you again. And just stay safe out there. And thanks for all you're doing, brother.
You betcha. You too.